Good afternoon, Noetic listeners. This is Holly Holt. The poet I bring you today is Sarah Teasdale, who is a phenomenal poet known for a remarkable feat, winning the first Columbia University Poetry Society Prize in 1918. For those who have never heard of this prize, this is the reason. The Columbia Poetry Prize is the former name of the Pulitzer Prize. Cool, right? I thought so too. According to the Britannica website, Teasdale's poems are consistently classical in style. She wrote technically excellent, pure, open-hearted lyrics, usually in such conventional verse forms as quatrains or sonnets. Despite her evident successes, she had critics who, according to the Poetry Foundation website, believed much of her poetry to be unsophisticated but full of musical language and evocative emotion. I do agree that much of her poetry does have a musical quality, but you can see growth in her ability as a poet from her first collection of poetry in 1907 when she was 23 to the collection that would see her win the Pulitzer, called Love Songs, published a decade later. Because I want my listeners to hear her evolution, I have chosen a poem written in 1907 that I want you to compare to the poem I will be fully analyzing today. The poem from 1907 is called Wishes and reads like this. I wish for such a lot of things that never will come true, and yet I want them all so much I think they might, don't you? I want a little kitty cat that's soft and tame and sweet, and every day I watch and hope I'll find one in the street. But Nursey says, come walk along, don't stand and stare like that. I'm only looking hard and hard to try and find my cat. As you can hear from this poem, there's a definite musical quality present in the flow. The rhythm is light and upbeat, and the use of the word nursey in repetition of hard and hard presents an almost childlike quality, as well as the overall intent of the poem. In the poem, she desperately wants a cat. Now, I want you to keep this poem in mind as I read the one I've chosen for today, which was published in 1920 in her collection Flame and Shadow. There will come soft rains. There will come soft rains, and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. When I compare this poem to the one written in 1907, I immediately realized two things. One, the musicality, even while the poem still rhymes, has vanished. And two, along with it, we are presented with a mature poem, a heavy poem, one written by a woman who is no longer a girl, and is fully aware how serious and crushing life can be. This poem is saying how nature would not realize mankind's disappearance from the earth. All of the creatures would continue as they are, without even the slightest change in their routines. The fourth set of lines, not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Make the reader pause, because this isn't to say that mankind will go quietly. Mankind will instead perish in war, a war between each other, while the rest of nature will go about peaceably, not making the slightest indication they would care for our passing. Of course, with this poem being written shortly after World War I wonder how much Teasdale was considering this devastating war while she was writing it. This would be an easy, albeit tragic, explanation for her to have written the poem seeing as millions of soldiers died during this war. Yet, what skews this is the fact she uses the word will, because it hasn't happened as of the point when she wrote the poem. Regardless, World War I was referred to as the war to end all wars, so it's curious to think that she knew mankind wasn't yet finished with bloodshed. Much like with any poem ever written, there are different interpretations. For example, in 1950, sci-fi master Ray Bradbury wrote a short story based off this poem. To give a plot summary, I turn to Wikipedia, which reads, "The story begins by introducing the reader to a computer-controlled house that cooks, cleans, and takes care of virtually every need that a well-to-do United States family could be assumed to have. The reader enters the text on the morning of August 4th, 2026, and follows the house through some of the daily tasks that it performs as it prepares its inhabitants for a day of work. At first, it is not apparent that anything is out of the ordinary, but eventually it becomes clear that the residents of the house are not present and that the house is empty. While no direct explanation of the non-existence of the family is produced, the silhouettes of a man, a woman, two children, and their play ball are described as having been burnt into one side of the house, implying that they were all incinerated by the thermal flash of a nuclear weapon. I believe there is another way to look at a poem, beyond the interpretation of the world outside ourselves. Being an introvert, I tend to process things internally and don't think it's too far-fetched to think that Teasdale was looking for calm in the midst of the war within her. The reader can feel a need for order and understanding, yet there is a sense of detachment too, as if she is dropping the full weight of what she feels in the world beyond, on mankind. In her life, Teasdale married rich businessman Ernst Filstinger in 1914, who traveled often and left her feeling lonely. She ended up divorcing him in 1929 without even knowing it, without him even knowing it until the divorce was going through. She had at one point been courted by poet Vachel Lindsay, who didn't feel he could provide for her, but her friendship with him rekindled after her divorce, when he was, by this point, married with children. Because of financial problems, Lindsay committed suicide in 1931, and she followed him 2 years later. Her war was over. In a sense, I believe this poem still holds a sense of light despite all of its darkness, because it allows us, as members of the human race, a chance to avoid what seems so inevitable. The word will gives us this power because it hasn't happened yet. This is merely a poem of what can happen, not what has already transpired. Because we are not yet snuffed out entirely by death and utter chaos, we still have the power to stop it. We still have the power to be as nature, circling and whistling and waking with spring. And all we must do is stop destroying one another. We can find peace within ourselves and beyond ourselves. We can learn love. We can learn hope. We can learn to call one another brother and sister, and we can teach it. Soft rains can be soft for all. Thank you.